So today we are in conversation with Ali Imrani, who's joining us from San Francisco, US. Hi Ali, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Sandeep. How are you doing?
I'm doing very good. So Ali happens to be a human resource professional. He has more than 8 years of experience, and he's worked with some of the Fortune 500 companies that include Unilever and Nestle. Recently, Ali completed his master's from Cornell University in human resource, and Ali has launched his online course on edVentr, which is Beat the Interview, Get the Job. Right now, interview is of course everybody in their life sometime or the other have gone through an interview phase or will be going through an interview phase. Some prepare, some don't. Some people are spontaneous, some people prepare. And what I learned from Ali is that organizations have their parameters set based on how they assess a candidate. Right. So Ali, I mean, one question that of course I have in mind is that how would you compare spontaneity in an interview, that is just being yourself, vis-a-vis preparing for an interview, understanding what the, of course you have an idea of the job even if you're spontaneous, but being more prepared, I mean, foreseeing questions, have a structured approach of answering. How do you compare both the options?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sandeep. And let me tell you that you need to have both. You need to do both, and that makes an interview setting sometimes challenging for people who want to do either or. Meaning that you want to be yourself and you want to tell the interviewer everything about yourself in a 30-minute session or 45-minute session, forgetting that you are there for a particular reason, and that is to get that job which you have applied for. The second part of it is being very prepared and scripted, which essentially means that, for example, I have m- met you as an interviewer for 30 minutes, and I feel that in 30 minutes we were running a script. So one of my conclusion is, yes, I know about this person, the technical skills and whatever, but I don't really know how would I be working with this person because we really didn't get a feel. So both of the impressions are not good in an interview setting. Um, so preparation is essential because interview is a purposeful meeting with with the hiring team with an intent of getting the job. And the second thing is, if you prepare adequately for an interview, you would not land into the problem of being sounding too scripted. So you have to craft your story, your original story. You have to craft some answers which are based on some kind of techniques. If the interviewer is using a behavioral interview technique, uh, and then it's your show. At the end of the day, you are the hero of that movie, of the 30 minutes or 45 minutes or 1 hour. The more engaging you are, the better it's going to get.
Definitely. I mean, you mentioned your story. It is important to present your story. Now one thing is, I mean, many a times people lack that self-awareness to know what is their story and how does it fit into the scheme of things, what the organization is looking for, right? I mean, sometimes, even when I've interviewed candidates, I miss out on really understanding who these people really are. Because, the interviews, I mean, it tends to be that you've prepared as per the job description. You're trying to tick all the boxes. If there are 10 items in the job description, you're trying to tick all the boxes. And in that process, people lose their individuality, right? And an interview is a sort of a, people have that fear that, I'm going into unknown waters. I don't know how they're going to perceive. There's certain element of nervousness. And is one interview or maybe two interviews enough to really know who this candidate is or what this person is?
Um, One or two, or I mean, I've been settings where in a single day I went through an interview marathon of about 5 interviews. So it was just 2.5 hours of talk time only, apart from the campus visit, this and that. I think companies which are great at selecting talent, they have a method to assess somebody. As I've said earlier, that interview is a result oriented meeting. You're looking for a result as a hiring team or as an individual. You both are there to get something out of that meeting. So as far as the hiring team is concerned, um, good selectors, companies which have good talent acquisition assessment systems, they know in each particular interview setting what they're looking for. So usually the first one, let's talk about that. So the first interview is usually a screener. Typically, it's a screener if you're going for a big Fortune 500 company. They get loads of volumes of resumes, right? And they have systems within their talent acquisition team, which is called applicant tracking system. It's an AI based system. There are different names for it, but what it does basically is one input is the job description, and the computer kind of scans it and takes the hit words, and then it applies on the resumes. And then if you have those words on your resume, bingo, you're set on a side for a screener. If not, nobody looks at it. So the first thing is the computer. So you have to get it right with the ATS. There are different softwares for that, but you can get it right on your end so that you get noticed by the computer. The second one is the really human interaction with your resume, and that's the recruiter. The average time, typically what is quoted around, is the interviewers, the recruiter spends about 6 seconds on one resume. 6 seconds is you can just you know feel it goes away in no time. So what they're looking for how much your resume is relevant to that job. And once they know it, then they just want to do a screener, basically, that how this resume talks to me over the phone or a Zoom call. But usually the screener is over the phone, right? So typically the recruiter will contact you and say, hey, so and so, and they will just follow through your resume, right? What they're doing essentially is just trying to feel that is this the person which this resume describes, yes or no, right? And get also, they, the screener is also to pass through some initial qualifiers, right? The initial qualifier says, would you be able to commute for this job? It's located in here. The salary range is typical here. Just to understand that your time and the hiring team time is well spent. So that at the end of the process, it didn't come out that the location would not work for you. Maybe the salary range is too low for you, or things like these. Um, but once you are cleared through the recruiter, then I think the formal assessment starts. And be it the interview, get the job. It's all about giving you preview of what is the methodology of companies when they assess you. And that's why this workshop differentiates from um, some other interview skills training, which is more about just responding to the questions, which is very important, but it's not, it doesn't organize your thoughts in that sequential manner, which usually the companies follow. Yeah. So just to circle back, whether it's one interview, two interview, three interviews, most of the companies cover four dimensions of assessment. Whether they want to club that into one day, like it happened with me, I did 5 interviews in one day because all was clubbed in that 2.5 hour session, and one interviewer has a goal to assess one dimension. Since I know the methodology, I know what's going on in that room, right? But for somebody who doesn't know the methodology, you will feel exhaustion after a while. You will be out of examples very quickly because how many examples you can create with 5 people for 5 hours or 2.5 hours, right? So it's a lot of redundancy, repetition. And the third is you will lose all the excitement you have because interview setting is like working in the gym. And you can be only good for like 30 or 45 minutes if you have prepared, but if it goes too long, then it's more exhaustion, and the quality is goes down for both of the parties, whether it's your end and the hiring team. Yeah.
Interesting. I attended your live. I attended your workshop live, Beat the Interview, Get the Job on edVentr, and honestly, it was an eye opener for me. I really understood in terms of how do organizations see a candidate, how do they assess and the different parameters and how you can structure yourself. Sometimes, we may have a good story, but in our entire story may just cover one dimension, whereas the organization was looking for multiple dimensions for that particular job. And this was really an eye opener. And there's one funny story that I think I heard or read somewhere that there's a CEO who wants to interview candidates, and he gets around 50 CVs, right? He picks up the first 10, and the HR guy asks, what about the others? You don't want to look at the other CVs? They're all good, so at least you can have a glance at. I don't want unlucky people to work with me. So he right. So my question is, of course, you already covered in terms of the parameters that people look for, in a profile or a CV. Of course, apart from the job fitment that they're looking for, and one needs to accordingly prepare or structure their interview. Now, one example that I really liked, I really liked the interview process of this company called Mind Valley. How I know the interview is because we were collaborating when I was with ISEC, and my brother happens to work there, and I saw this entire journey of how he went through the interview process, right, which included smaller projects, which included him creating a YouTube video, which is of course creating employer branding as well, but YouTube video in terms of what does he bring on the table, or what is it that he can contribute, and then a series of interviews, right? Is there any ideal interview process that you've seen and you feel that yes, this is what really covers all aspects of what we're looking for in a candidate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think ideal, it really depends on the the kind of job the company has in question. Um, but I think what I would say is the assessment dimensions of a typical job. We're not talking about. So let's do the bell curve. So the outlier jobs, right, or not so typical jobs. Let's say you're applying for a CEO's job. The CEO's job will have all these dimensions, but then even before that, there will be a lot of assessments, a lot of personality assessments, a lot of psychometric testing, a lot of informal meetings with the board, with the chairman. Um, and why they're doing it is because of a simple reason. Jobs which has a very big scope of impact, if you are hiring somebody for that job, there are a lot of dimensions in that job which are not only functional, not only maybe teamwork, but that job affects pretty much everybody in the company and outside the company and the board. And if it's a public corporation, then the larger public, right? So you're making a very big decision. So a CEO's interview, assessment, or selection would be very different than your typical middle management or early entry level jobs. Um, let's talk about another sector, consulting, management consulting. Management consulting is a very specialized profession. And when I say specialized, I mean doctors are also specialized and lawyers are also specialized. But there's a difference between management consulting and doctors and lawyers in terms of their training. Doctors go for a residency in the course. So they do an apprenticeship when they're studying before even they get the degree. So they're in the system. They know how hospitals work. Lawyers also do internships and other practice after they graduate with companies. We call it first year law, second year law. MBAs have nothing like this, right? So some MBAs go in companies and then adjust into the job, but management consultants have a very different verb, because a company hires McKinsey and Company to come and solve a problem in 3 months. You are a new MBA on the team. They don't have time to to get you trained into the management consulting system, right? Before even they do that, they want you to get trained on the case method, how to solve a business problem, and that's what they do. So in their interview, the first and foremost thing after a screener is business case, solve a business case, and then they will move through the 4 dimensions or whatsoever, and then they will have some training or onboarding, right? So these are just 2 examples of some outlier kind of positions which are very different interview setting. But typical jobs, the assessment dimensions will be the same, but what makes it ideal or not ideal, in my opinion, is the sequencing, and is the medium that they're using to engage with you, right? Um, so, for example, when I got admitted to Cornell, one of my parts of the admission application was to send them a video, and send them a video was very interesting too, because there was no written prompt. It was a video they sent me, and I have to record back a video in response to that, and that was timed 3 minutes. So there was a lady who used to say, "What makes you special in terms of your background to be chosen for this program?" And then you start, right? Um, so what they want to assess for that is maybe not only the content, but how you are delivering the content, how you are as a person too. So that medium is interesting rather than typing, you know, your response, right? Um, Gamification is also something new. Like you were mentioning, some companies are using gamification, and I think gamification is um, more objective oriented, because in a world now that we live today, we have, companies um, want to have diverse pool of talent, um, but sometimes they face a lot of barriers in terms of getting talent in the door. So gamification cuts across all those barriers. Even probably they would not know the name of the person until the end. That is, okay, who performed best on this game. So that's a very objective kind of decision making. But my only thing is gamification will only can tell you the fit of the job in terms of functional or technical skills, but how this person will work in your team, um, that only you can assess through some assessments maybe, or you can meet the person and ask them certain kind of questions which kind of point towards um, organizational fit.
Interesting. I mean, of course, organizations adopt different methodologies of recruitment, and it is a very important decision. I mean, for an individual, definitely, this is one of the most important decisions, because it is pertaining to their career, right? And for an organization, it is equally important, if not more, because the cost of one wrong recruitment is really high. I attended a session sometime last year, where it was a sort of a recruitment company which was telling the organization that if you recruit a wrong candidate, how much it can cost you. And we don't tend to factor in these costs, for the time loss, or for recruiting the wrong candidate. Of course, you're paying and then you're expecting a certain degree of output, but if that does not happen, it's basically time and money both wasted.
Mhm.
And more than time and money, it's the opportunity cost, right, of a wrong hire. And many times it may happen that a person may seem very suitable prima facie, but the person himself or herself does not really know whether this was the real thing that I wanted to do. I may take up the job because it's a need of the hour. or I have the qualifications, I may want to do something else, but I just decide that, okay, I'm going to continue into this particular field, X, Y, or Z. And, you take certain decisions. And that brings me, to my next question, which apparently also happens to be the topic of your forthcoming online course on edVentr, which is, how to find your calling. Now, this is a deep, deep question. How to find your calling. Many people get retired and they still don't know what their calling is because they've just lived their life trying to pay the next bill, right? You've gone month to month or maybe quarter to quarter or a period to period, but you've seen the job that only at the end of the month gives you a salary with which you can meet your living expenses, right? It's an abstract question. It's a very open-ended question, and what is interesting is that you're putting structure into it in terms of how to find your calling. Would you like to talk something about it?
Yeah, sure. So I I think one end is the research, which kind of now resonates a lot, especially when millennials are coming into the workforce. A lot of companies now, they've realized after millennials started to come in the workforce is um, what makes them um, to select a company. And probably before that, the points of attraction or the factors of attraction for talent was different. Maybe it was job security. Maybe it was money. Maybe it was growth and development opportunity in a job, or maybe it was developing a career in one company. Um, but now what has changed? So um, a lot of surveys have been done because millennials tend to be a different population. And the second thing is at the workplace, there were three generations which were combining when millennials are entering into the workforce, right? One generation is towards retiring, the other generation is towards in the middle management or high management, and here comes the millennials, which is somewhat very different than the other two older generations. What makes them different? One sole point of attraction for millennials when they select a company is purpose. Millennials are looking for purpose driven companies. Everything else is kind of not going to be the primary factor of choice. Why they're doing that? Because the world has changed. Now we are living in a world of a knowledge worker, which is very different. A knowledge worker can do work in gig economy. They can do freelance work because they can generate value with technology platforms, with Zoom, for example, right now, which we are conversing on, and with a lot of other things which technology had made so easy. You can open your own business. You can make your own website. You can go on YouTube and start talking to people directly without going to a channel, right? This was not there 10, 15 years ago, right? So it has created access. One of the examples I want to quote is the mission of your company, edVentr, is democratization of learning, which essentially means access. A lot of access in the whole globe. People can get into edVentr and access learning, right? They don't have to enroll in a class. They don't have to submit an application. Learning when needed, self-paced, right? This was not there 10 years ago. So millennials now are looking for what, as you mentioned, some people retire even, and then sometimes they realize their purpose or their calling, and sometimes even that, even not because they were busy paying their bills. Why millennials are different? Because with all this infrastructure and the change in this world, with the access, you can generate value for your own self. Anybody can become an entrepreneur today. The only thing which is maybe their destination X, where they are, let's say, graduating from the school, and opening up their self venture, the gap is what? The gap is you don't know your calling. If you know your calling, there are a lot of means and resources where you can generate value, right? We see a lot of people today um, on YouTube. We see a lot of people today, even on YouTube, they're talking about different things. Some people are just talking about cooking, right? Some people are talking about, different stuff like um, traveling, but there is some value. That's why people are following them, right? So there is the value. The only thing is difference between somebody who is just doing a 9 to 5 kind of thing for paying their bills is they're generating somewhat value, and that value is going is and if they're working for somebody else, they're generating value for them for that company, but they also don't know that what value they're generating. Secondly, they also don't know they're calling because they put themselves behind, maybe the last in everything, and the bill comes first. So when I think about this, and there's an important there's this popular quote, love what you do and do what you love. I think people who don't have, kind of put their mind on their calling is they're trying to fall in love with what they're doing. And trust me, that's not going to happen because if you don't know what you love, then you're basically trying to push yourself in just trying to fall in love with somebody, but you don't know your strengths. You don't know what you are capable of doing, and there are different um, ways of finding yourself, and that's why I thought um, that why we can organize the thought process of somebody who, let's say, um, start to take the journey of finding themselves. And how I got to this thought process is my own story. It took me a decade to 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 now put a finger on a thing and say this is my calling in life. It took me 10 years with 5 or 6 different kind of education and a lot of different kind of work experience to say, okay, you know what, my interest is in developing people, right? HR is still too broad. So what in HR, right? So in HR, my interest is to develop people and partner with them how they can achieve their dreams. Because for me, dreams are very important. Everybody dream. Everybody has some kind of dream. The only thing is, um, some people don't dare to dream. Some people dream, but they don't have goals, so the dream remains a dream. Uh, and some people dream and have goals and achieve them. So I think that the only thing is stopping for anybody to not to find their calling or to ignore their calling or not to dream is themselves. Any other thing is just a temporary thing, and there's going to be a fix for that.
And this is I think your natural calling. I know we've had multiple interactions, and it's your passion. From what I understand, is it's your passion to help people find their purpose and walk the journey along with them for their development, right? I mean, I'm talking through the multiple interactions that we have had, and so I wish you all the best, in terms of helping people find their purpose, right? Which is, I think, the biggest decision or biggest awakening, I would say, of one's life, right? And personally, there are two things that I am looking forward to to learn from this workshop. One is that you may be doing thing called something called A, which is not your passion, which is not your calling, but it is a need, right? And you want to do something which is B. And this B happens to be your calling. There's this inner calling. I remember Steve Jobs in the commencement speech at Stanford mentioned that somewhere your heart and intuition already know what you want to do and where you want to go. It's just that we don't listen to our heart enough, right? And we continue doing what may seem as the safest possible option, right? So from A to B, there's a transition, and that transition does not happen overnight. That transition is a process. If this is my call, the calling could be, let's say I am in a job, I want to be an entrepreneur, something that I have experienced, right? How to prepare for it, and when to take a calculated plunge. Even the plunge has to be calculated, right? Secondly, it could be, let's say I'm in the tech field, I'm in the networking field, but I want to be an app developer, right? I'm just using examples, right? I'm in the HR field. I've been working on the recruitment aspect, but I want to work in the learning and development phase, right? Or something as simple as that, I am a manager in this position. Next 10 years down the line, I want to lead the organization as the CEO. My calling is more of aligned with leadership, right? And this is what my goal is. But that transition is a journey. Sometimes it can be two completely unrelated directions that we may want to get into. But my question, of course, what I would want to learn is how to bridge that gap.
Yeah,
right? And bridging these gaps need one thing, which is bold decisions. These decisions are not easy, right? You need bold decisions. So these are two things that I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
And yeah,
That's what I think it's important to appreciate and acknowledge, and as you've mentioned, that this is a process. When people dream, and that's the difference between when you dream about your inner calling and when you have a dream which is about something else, right? A crazy dream, right? When you have a dream about your inner calling, the difference is, as I've mentioned, that you have to put goals to reach to that dream. And why we have to or how we have to put goals. I take my mind as you were talking. I was thinking about um, professions uh, which are not very, which doesn't have this kind of setting. For example, I'll throw an example. If you want to be a management consultant, go and do an MBA, right? You go and do an MBA, you do an internship, 90% their chances you will become a consultant. Good or bad, we don't know, but you will end up in consulting. Talk about acting. You want to be a great actor? What do? You go to a school and become an actor? I haven't seen a lot of examples like that, right? So what do these artists do? And why I'm using artists, the example of artists is they live and breathe their passion, right? Um, so how do they transition into becoming a mainstream actor? Usually, not all of them go to a school. If you just read biographies of great artists, you will find that some of them were doing something which was unrelated. They never went to an acting school, right? So what they were doing. Another good example. Here it comes, or it just came into my mind. Giorgio Armani. Let's talk about Giorgio Armani. Everybody knows Giorgio Armani. Giorgio Armani was studying medicine, and he was. People who don't know he studied medicine, it's just a shock. Giorgio Armani studied medicine, and at that time, I think it was time of a war. He was called in for military service, and then I think he went, or he didn't go. I'm not too sure about that, but obviously his heart was not in there. So after going practicing medicine, or after studying medicine a little bit, he suddenly thought that this is not what I want to do. Left that, and he was 40 years old at that time, not 25, not 18. He was not going to school. He was 40 years old at that time. What did he do at 40 years? He was left out of job, no job. So what did he do? He he was always had this interest of working with clothes and how to make people look good. Looking good can be cosmetics, can be a lot of things. A hairdresser also does something to make people look good. But he had interest in clothing. So he got a job in one of the very famous Italian suit designers, men's suit designers, where he used to be a window dresser, a merchandiser. And suddenly, a lot of clientele started to interact with him just because he used to give good advice. Sir, you would wear this, you're going to look good. And then this person of the store thought that, this guy is a good salesperson. What about designing some stuff? And he started designing. He didn't went to a school. He started designing so much so that the shop started to sell his designs with their name. And then he found his business partner. He found this guy who appreciated his talent, and who ultimately became the business person who said, Giorgio, you're designing a lot of suits for the shop. That's your design. You should open your own shop. He said, I don't have the money. He said, I will take care of that. I can do the business side of things. You are an artist. And then they somehow found the money and they opened the House of Armani in Milan, right? And that's how Armani is now. And 40 years old, he started doing that. So the transition, as you said, is difficult. Sometimes it's gradual. Sometimes it's like Armani. I don't want to do that. I just want to get out of that, right? Steve Jobs, when he was fired from Apple, he went and opened Pixar, which is one of the best animation houses today, right? And Steve Jobs says himself that that was the one of the how can he starts like this? How can you get fired off your own company? It's weird, right? You make your own company, you get fired from the company. Shocking. But then he made Pixar. He said, one of the greatest things I've ever did was making Pixar. So sometimes it's a shock, but sometimes it's gradual. And gradual is not also, I won't say it's bad, or there's something wrong. Obviously, there's less drama. I mean, it's less dramatic in terms of, your circumstances. But sometimes you can't afford that. So one thing which I will focus on in our workshop, which I thought, which resonated with me, and which I also found, which helped me to find myself, is focus on transferable skills. Transferable skills um, are very, very important, and and they're important not only for you to find your calling, but they're important if you're doing a career pivot or a career switch, or if you want to get promoted from a very specialist field to a leadership field position where you're responsible for people or general management. All all these pivots, whether it's a long pivot or a short pivot, transferable skills is the key. And if you recognize that, what do I have, these transferable skills, and which one I love out of these, and which one applies the most in some profession, then I think it you might have a method to to find at least a framework through which you can find your calling and then start working towards it. Because otherwise, unless you're in a setting where you can explore a lot of, like, for example, if you are in a college, you can take a gap year and you go to a different place and start studying something new. You can do that. If you have the luxury to do that, do that. That's amazing, right? But if not everybody has the luxury to do that. So how you can, to answer your question, gradually do that is try to figure out what transferable skills you have, and then try to figure out which ones you love the most. And here's a good tip: the one which you love the most, you would not know yourself. Who would know? People around you. Because just ask them, what do you think I talk about most of the time? Just ask them this question. Your friends, your parents, your neighbor, whoever you talk to, just ask them, what do I talk about most of the time? Don't ask them what I think I'll be good at. Just ask them, what do I talk about most time? And then they will tell you, I think you talk about this most of the time. That's what you're attracted to. That's what your your you can say that's what you are. In fact, because that's what you talk about most of the time, and that kind of brings energy to you. And anything which brings energy to you is got to do with your calling somehow.
Very, very insightful pointers, Ali. I mean, this give us an idea in terms of, how structured your course and workshop will be, and certain methodologies that people can practically apply. My learning has been that, I mean, if you're at A and if you want to reach B, you have to plan for a transition. And unless and until your circumstances are very flexible, you have capital support, and you have the luxury of time and money. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but that's not the case for most of the people. And that reminded me of this quote by Lionel Messi. And I'm just opening it on the internet, and he said, it took me 17 years and 114 days to become an overnight success. Right.
So
So
yeah,
it is not that people say that today I was in a job, and I this morning I decided I'm going to be an entrepreneur, or I'm doing this, and this morning. You're lucky if it happens, or it may be accidental, or the situations or circumstances may be working in your favor. But in rest of the cases, there's enough, ample amount of planning that is needed. But yes, thank you so much, Ali. It was really interesting, as always. It was very interesting talking to you, conversing with you, and I am looking forward to Find Your Calling by Ali Imrani.
well, thank you very much, Sandeep, and thanks for the edVentr platform, which kind of helped me to leverage, my message across to all of the people who will watch this. And if you like it, sign up for the workshop.
Excellent. Thank you, Ali.